So what is the role of revolution in history?
So this in particular for Marx, I think, is a really key moment, which is what makes that such a good question. In his vision, the epic narrative that he's presenting to us, revolution is key. It's not enough to have evolutionary change. It's not a question of compromises. It's not a case of bargaining or balancing interests. Revolution is necessary as part of the process of a subjugated class coming to awareness of its own historical role. And when we get to the proletariat, this working class in its entirety, to whom Marx assigns this epic Promethean role of being the ones who are going to liberate all of humanity, a class that is universal in its interests and in the sort of role in salvation history that they'll be playing in this secular framework. They need revolution and the experience of revolution in order to come into their own. Because without it, you'll only have half-hearted compromise and something less than the consciousness that they then need in order to rule, to administer, and to play the historical role that they're fated to have.
How did he conceive of a revolution, potentially a violent revolution, stabilizing itself into something where the working class was able to rule?
That's where things become a good deal less detailed in his and Engel's accounts. The answer that they proposed in part was, this is for the future to determine. So all of the details will be settled later. I think there was allied to this was a tremendous confidence in some very 19th century ideas about how society could be administered and what made for orderly society. In a way where if the right infrastructure was in place, you might expect society to kind of run itself without the need for micromanagement from above. And hence, we arrive at Marx's tantalizing promise that there will be a period where it'll be necessary to have centralized control. And there might have to be, as he puts it, despotic inroads against property in order to bring this revolution to pass. But then afterwards, the state, because it represents everybody, rather than representing particular class interests that are in conflict with other classes, the state will eventually wither away. So there won't be need for it. Now, that's not to say that pure stasis arrives, right? Or that the stabilization equals being frozen in time. It's not as if that is what things will look like. But instead, the big issues will be settled. And henceforth, people will be able to enjoy lives of, as he would consider it, in authentic freedom, without necessity, without poverty, as a result of this blessed state that's been arrived at.
Despotic inroads against property. Did he elaborate on the despotic inroads?
Dispossession of the middle classes and of the bourgeoisie. In his model, humanity is never standing still, right? So he'd probably argue in this dynamic vision of how history unfolds that there's always conflict and it's always moving, propelling history forward towards its predestined ending. In the way he saw this climax was that as things did not stay the same, the condition of the working class was constantly getting worse, and hence their revolutionary potential was growing. And at the same time, the expropriators, the bourgeoisie, were also facing diminishing returns as they competed against one another with more and more wealth concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, and more elements of what had been the middle class detached from the ruling class and being pressed down into the working class. For Marx, this is really a key part. I mean, it's a key part of this whole ratchet effect that's going to produce this final historical explosion. And in German, the word given to that process was Verelendung, which is very evocative. Elend means misery. So it's the growing misery. When this gets translated into English, the results are never quite as evocative or satisfactory. The words that get used are immiserization or pauperization, meaning more and more people are being turned into paupers. But for Marx, that prediction is really key. And even in his own lifetime, there were already hints that, in fact, if you looked sociologically at the really developed working classes in places like Great Britain or Germany, that process was not playing out as he had expected. In fact, although there have been enormous dislocations and tremendous suffering in the early chaotic sort of Wild West stages of capitalism and of industrialization, there had been reform movements as well. And there had been unions which had sought to carve out rules and agreements with employers for how the conditions under which workers labored might be ameliorated. Moreover, the middle class, rather than dwindling, seemed to actually be strengthening and growing in numbers, or the appearance of new kinds of people like white-collar workers or technical experts. So already in Marx's own lifetime, and then especially in what follows Marx's lifetime, this becomes a real problem because it puts a stick into the spokes of this particular historical prediction.